Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third annual Thinking Spatially event. My name is Brianna Menning, and I'm the Programs and Communications Manager at the Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Minnesota. We're so glad that you've been able to join us for our first webinar edition of Thinking Spatially. This year's theme is Mapping Politics and Polarization. It's being presented by several units here at the university that we wanted to thank, DASH and the University of Minnesota Libraries, the University of Minnesota Morris Libraries, the Institute for Advanced Study, U-Spatial, and Lattice. And as you can see, we have all of the members of the planning committee listed as well. So thank you to all of them for all of their work for this great event. We will run from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. with our first set of presentations. Then we're going to have a short break from 10:30 to 10:45, and at 10:45 we'll move on to our spatial data presentations. At 11:30 we will conclude the large group Zoom webinar and have the opportunity for a meet and greet for those interested to breaking into smaller discussions with our spatial data presenters. That will last about 30 minutes. We will try to reserve a couple of minutes after each of the presenters in the first section for questions. Questions in general should be typed into the Q&A portion of the chat, and we will answer them as we are able to, although we recognize we likely won't be able to answer all of the questions that you have. We are also going to attempt to stay on time today, so just bear with us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to, Abby, if you want to click through, we'll cover, here's who we have in our 9 o'clock set of presentations: Kirsten Delegard, Tim Lindberg and Stephen Crabtree, Brad Newhauser, Melinda Kernick, and Amelia McNamara. So with that, let me start the introduction of our first speaker. Kirsten Delegard is the co-founder and project director for the Mapping Prejudice project. In addition to her position at the University of Minnesota Libraries, where Mapping Prejudice is based, she holds faculty affiliations in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Society, and with the Heritage Studies and Public History program. She has a PhD in history from Duke University. Please join me in welcoming Kirsten Delegard.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming out on this beautiful fall morning. So I'm just going to share my slides here as we get started. I wish we were by the Mississippi River right now, let me say that, but I'm happy to be in this space with all of you. So in the last several years, I have given dozens of talks about mapping prejudice, where I've shared our data and described this history of housing discrimination and structural racism in Minneapolis. And over time, since 2016, our data set kept getting bigger, and my message, I would say, kept getting sharper. I found myself repeating the same thing. Our community, the Twin Cities, have some of the highest racial disparities in the country. This is unjust. It's literally killing people. But we all are going to suffer the consequences of these profound inequalities. They will rip our community asunder, is what I said. And then, of course, on the evening of May 25th, George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police officers. And from this corner at 38th and Chicago in South Minneapolis, demonstrations and civil unrest spread first around the country and then around the world. And what began here in my hometown has mushroomed into what observers are now calling the largest protest movement in American history. More than 20 million, this is a conservative estimate, more than 20 million Americans have taken to the streets to support Black Lives Matter. And in the wake of these events, Mapping Prejudice has been fielding calls from people all around the world who want to know why this started in Minneapolis. So I think that is a question that we're all going to be talking about for years and years to come. But my team has been able to provide one slice of this larger explanation, this history of racial covenants and the willful amnesia around this history here in Minneapolis. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I always think it's good to start with some statistics. The Twin Cities has the highest gap between Black and white homeownership rates for any major metropolitan area in the country. So that means that 75% of white families own their homes, only 23% of Black families can make that same claim. So housing, this home ownership gap undergirds a whole raft of other disparities that afflict our community. Housing sits at the foundation of everything else. It determines whether you're going to be healthy, whether you're going to be sick, the kind of education you can get, whether your family will be able to amass any kind of wealth. And since 2016, my team at Mapping Prejudice has been asking the same question. How did we get here? If Minnesota is such a great place to live, how did we get such a huge gap in this critical area? What did we do wrong? And of course, what can we do differently in the future? So our team in the Borchard Map Library came together around a desire to show one thing to as many people as possible, that these contemporary racial disparities that I've displayed here on the screen are not the result of some natural order. And we've been doing this through maps by leading community members actually in the construction of a map that illuminates how developers specifically used racial covenants to reserve huge swaths of land in Hennepin County for the exclusive use of white people. So I'm going to pause here for a definition. Racial covenants are clauses that are inserted into property deeds. Here in the Twin Cities, real estate developers started using racial covenants in 1910. And this here on the screen is the first deed with this kind of restriction. It said, the party of the second part hereby agrees that the premises hereby conveyed shall not at any time be conveyed, mortgaged, or leased to any person or persons of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent. So these clauses, this particular clause was written by someone named Edmund Walton. It was inserted into thousands of property deeds across the Twin Cities. But in general, these clauses were attached to new land that was being developed to keep people who are not white from buying or even occupying homes. The language varies, but it's always racist. I'm going to read you a couple more examples just to give you a sense. So no person of any race other than the Aryan race shall use or occupy any building or any lot. And this was actually put in place in 1946, by the way. No person of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race domiciled with an owner or tenant. So I make a point of reading this language in every presentation, reading it aloud, because one of the missions of our project is to shift the way that Americans talk about race. We have tended to talk about race with a lot of euphemism and evasion, and one of our messages is that racism will not disappear if we ignore it, that we need to confront this hard history. If we want truth, if we want justice, we have to have truth. But it's hard to hear, you know, and it's especially hard. I'm sorry that we're in this digital environment, but all of you at home, please take a moment to breathe. So I think that's really important. So if you look at this history of housing, this question of racial covenants jumps out. As you can see, they're so outrageous, so blatantly racist, and they were used in every community across the country. In fact, by the 1930s, the federal government was making their use a precondition for public underwriting of development. So, and over the last century, racial covenants have been examined in dozens of books, plays, movies, poetry, art. They were the subject of countless studies, journalistic inquiries, court cases, including the landmark Shelley v. Kramer case that was heard before the US Supreme Court. But even with all of that attention, there's a lot that we don't know about these restrictions. And in our quest to figure out how we got to this place that we are today, our team wanted to know some things. What did these covenants actually say? Where were they used? How common were they? How much land did they cover? And we decided to do this research in an unconventional way. We decided to harness the power of community to build the first ever comprehensive map of racial covenants for an American city. And what our project has been doing is we've been leading people from of all ages, all backgrounds in the work of mapping these restrictions. We harness some digital tools as well. We use computers to comb through millions and millions of property deeds to flag the documents that seem to have this racist language. And then we use the Zooniverse platform to enlist volunteers. And we had over 3,000 volunteers read 177,000 historic property deeds for our map of Hennepin County. So here's what our volunteers found. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing a time-lapse map of the spread of racial covenants in Hennepin County over time. So each one of these blue dots denotes an individual property parcel that that was reserved exclusively for the use of white people. All this blue, when the time lapse in the upper right-hand corner reaches the end, it will show the 24,000 property parcels that we've identified that have racial covenants attached to them. So in every presentation, I read that text so you can see exactly what we're talking about with racial covenants. I show this map so that people can fully grasp these are not isolated examples. You can see from the map how ubiquitous they are. But it's also important to understand how powerful they were. Covenants ran with the land, which meant that they were there forever once they were embedded in the deeds. It didn't matter how many times the property was bought or sold or what was torn down or built. Once that land was restricted for white people, that's the way it stayed forever. And anyone who dared to breach that a covenant, who dared to either rent or sell the property to someone who was not white, someone who was named in the covenant, risked ending up in court and losing everything, all the equity that they had accumulated in the property. That kind of breach triggered a process that would put the property actually back in the hands of the person who put the covenant in the first place. So for large swaths of Minneapolis, that would mean that the property would go back to Edmund Walton or his heirs. But the reality is that not very many people did this. Obviously, the consequences were profound, but the painful truth about covenants is that they were very popular among white people. Black people, by contrast, saw covenants as a basic threat to liberty. And here in the Twin Cities, we had leaders like Nellie Francis, Madison Jackson, Lena Olive Smith, James Wardlaw, Katie McWatt, who devoted their lives to fighting these practices in particular. And they weren't alone. All over the country, Black people put everything on the line to challenge them. They bought houses with covenants. They moved into white neighborhoods. And thanks to these activists, these covenants are illegal today. They brought their fight to the courts, mounting a legal challenge that ended up at the Supreme Court. They brought their fight to state legislatures and to Congress, which passed the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But despite all of these victories, we're still living with the legacies of this practice. So what did covenants do? They transformed a city that was relatively mixed into a racially segregated city. Covenants legitimated harassment and violence against Black residents who were often forced to retreat to Black enclaves for safety. Neighborhoods that were gated with these covenants are still the whitest parts of Hennepin County today. The neighborhoods that didn't have covenants were redlined. That was the federal practice that declared neighborhoods that were racially mixed to be hazardous investments for lenders. This choked off capital to these neighborhoods. So neighborhoods like the Near North Side or the Old South Side. So these two things, covenants and redlining, worked to make it really hard for people who are not white to find stable, affordable, and decent housing. It made it really hard for people who are not white to buy homes. And of course, this is important for so many reasons, but especially because homeownership is a critical avenue to wealth accumulation. And with this history in mind, it's no surprise today that we have a 10-to-1 wealth gap between Blacks and whites in this country. we're putting forward that statistic in this history to help people understand that racism is not just personal. It's not just the sentiments of people like these protesters who showed up to protest the Minnesota Fair Housing Bill in 1962. Their placards make clear how they feel about integration, miscegenation. What we're trying to do is we're trying to reframe this understanding. We want people to see that racist ideology has actually been embedded into community institutions over decades, that it's actually been written into the foundational documents of our communities. The map of this history we have created gives lie to a central myth of our community. I think many Minnesotans have been taught that Minnesota never had any kind of formal segregation, that these racial disparities grew out of a natural order or a set of personal choices. That's just not true. And this map that we're making together helps us understand why it seems to be the same group of people who are vulnerable to housing insecurity. It's structural. So history reveals that the system was actually built to keep Black and brown people from owning property. It was built to keep Black and brown people out of places that were seen to be desirable. The story that we're telling is in no way unique to the Twin Cities. In every community, covenants were used to divide communities by race. Across the nation, Blacks, in the words of the poet Langston Hughes, were hemmed in. That's the title of a 1949 poem that he wrote about Chicago. It goes like this: "They've got covenants restricting me, hemmed in on the south side, can't breathe free." And 71 years later, Black people are still struggling to breathe in Minneapolis and in all across the country. Please, 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 I can't breathe. That's what George Floyd pleaded as he lay pinned under the knee of a police officer. Our map is meant to bring people together around a new understanding of the way that we have been divided. It's meant to help many white people see structural racism for the first time. We want it to be a powerful platform for policymaking, for research, and for conversations like the one that we're going to have today. So the question that I'm going to leave you with is, what do we do now? The time has come for us to take action towards justice, but I'm going to leave you with a challenge. What's the work that you can do, and when are you going to start? So with that, I will stop sharing and open it up for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Kirsten. And just as a reminder to everybody, we have over 120 people joining us online. Please type in any questions you have in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and type in any questions you have. We've got a couple minutes for questions for Kirsten before we have to move on to our next presentation. So please do so quickly. Thanks.
Brianna, do you want me to answer the questions? Are you going to monitor them, or what's the?
Yeah, okay. We've got a couple questions popping in. I will try to quickly read through them out loud, and then I will let you answer. So we've had a few questions along the lines of, what are plans for expanding the project to other communities or other cities?
Oh, I love this question because I have a great answer for it. We have expanded our geographic focus to include Ramsey County, and we are underway with that work now in partnership. I want to give a shout out to our partners at St. Catherine University, who have created a working group to do a lot of community engagement, especially around this work. But we also just received this summer, we received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to help us streamline and develop our digital workflows and toolkit so that we can give all the technical stuff that we have developed to any community that wants to do this work. And we're in conversation with communities around the country about how we can support this work. I see Ryan is on the call here too, so he can stop me, or he can shake his head. But one of the communities where we have been in a conversation for several years is Milwaukee. And I would say that's, we're definitely going to go forward with providing them with some tools. And yeah, and we're in conversation with hopefully some communities on the East Coast, the West Coast. But again, like, we're not going to map all those. We're just going to provide them with the tools, some of the tools, so they can do the work themselves.
Okay, and one last, if you want to answer this one quickly. We've had a couple people saying, how do I, if I'm going to sell a property in an area, how do I make sure those covenants don't exist? Or if they still do exist, what does that mean?
Yeah, so if the property is in Hennepin County, you can go to our map at www.mappingprejudice.org, put in your address, see whether there's a racial covenant. And then the state has actually passed a new law that makes it easier for people to discharge the covenants. And you can fill out a form online to register your rejection of the covenants. Obviously, these are not enforceable, but it's another tool for property owners to distance themselves, to register their moral injury, I would say, around these practices.
Excellent, thank you so much. We have a number of more questions pouring in. Unfortunately, we can't answer them and still stay on time, but
can I answer? Can I type answers?
Yes, yeah. If you want to,
why don't we try to do that?
Answers, okay. And we will also encourage people, go to the Mapping Prejudice Project if you want to learn more or get involved.
Great.
Because I think it's a great opportunity. So thank you so much. Okay, well, we are moving on to our next presentation. So I will introduce our next speakers, who are Tim Lindberg and Stephen Crabtree. Tim is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Morris in the political science department. He holds a PhD from the University at Albany and focuses his research on American government and politics, as well as constitutional law. Stephen is an associate professor of geology at the University of Minnesota Morris. He has a PhD from the University of Michigan and focuses his research in volcanic mapping and mineralogy. So please join me in welcoming Tim Lindberg and Stephen Crabtree.
Great, thank you, Brianna. And thank you everybody for coming to the session here. I'm going to make sure this is all working. There we go. So Stephen and I are going to kind of trade off. I'm working the slides, so bear with us if we get off track a little bit in terms of who's doing what. As Brianna said, my name is Tim Lindberg and I teach in political science. Stephen teaches in geology, and we came together on this project because Stephen knows ArcGIS very well, and I am a complete novice at it, but obviously know the political side. And so we've been kind of working together on a couple different projects, both separately and together, on making the maps work and everything. And so we wanted to share a little bit today about what these look like and how they work. And looking, like the title says, beyond who won, looking at those political changes with voting data and not just thinking about who got the most votes in an election. So as I noted, one of the big things, traditionally, political maps tend to overemphasize winners, they overemphasize losers, and they focus on like the blunt outcomes of elections rather than nuances of the voting shares or shifts in voting pattern over time. Even when they're trying to show, so on this slide, you kind of can see in the bottom right-hand corner, Minnesota's 7th district, which is where Morris is. It's represented by Colin Peterson, but is actually the most Republican district, House district in Minnesota. And they're trying to show over time how things have changed, various votes in the district, but it's still very blunt, right? You're just showing who's winning each one and a little bit of the shading. The electoral college maps we are all used to, very, very blunt. So political scientists and journalists do or discuss these underlying facets of elections beyond just who wins and who loses. But we, kind of looking at political mapping generally doesn't do this as much when you're looking at election data. And so Here we're trying to think about how maps can really focus, on the story. So you visualize data to tell a story, to understand better these changes, these shifts, these patterns over a geographic space in terms of who's voting for whom, which parties are being supported, which candidates, what voters are looking for in supporting candidates, or shifting that support. And I said, winning matters. Obviously, losing matters. We care about who wins, and that's why we use these blunt maps. But how they win and why they win is really important to understand as well.
So what we're going to be looking at here really is trying to then take a lot of that into account, trying to look at this over time, trying to see different examples, both from the modern era in Minnesota, as well as past years when Minnesota was frankly a lot more politically complex. For the modern era, we're going to be looking at precinct level voting patterns for Minnesota state house districts, not federal, not governor, not US Senate, but just down to the Minnesota state legislature. And instead of just looking at who won or who lost, and that being that, we're also going to look at the idea of, not just who won, who lost, how much, but where are the wasted votes? Where are the excess votes? Where do you have precincts that are voting against the winners of that district? And where do you have precincts that are overwhelmingly kind of tilting the scales in those districts? Secondly, we're going to be looking at historic examples of the Farmer Labor Party, not Democrat Farmer Labor, but just Farmer Labor between 1918 and 1942. And where you can see the relative share of the voting between not two, but three substantial parties in Minnesota over a fairly long period of time. It's going to help us understand how a multi-party system could actually work and how those shifts can actually occur over time, but within a US context, not elsewhere. So Tim, if you want to flip the slide. So what we have then for kind of the backdrop here and why we're looking at the state house is in part because there's been a lot of change, a lot of turnover over time. Such that if we look at the table here, we can see that from 2008 over there on the right and coming across leftwards to 2018, party control of the Minnesota state legislature, state house, hasn't just changed a few times, but it's had major swings in both directions over the course of just 10 years. And in doing so, you want to ask, does this mean the voters are really just that indecisive? Are we actually switching a lot? Are they that persuadable? Or is it really movement that's happening in certain parts of the state, in certain areas of the state, in the rural regions, greater Minnesota, in the suburbs, near the Twin Cities, or maybe even within the Twin Cities themselves? So the data that we're going to use is looking on the precinct level, as I've already said, not the larger scale, but just down to the precinct. This data is available from the Minnesota Secretary of State's office. You can actually find quite a bit of data there going back quite a few years. And we're going to be looking at not just who won, who lost. Yeah, that's part of it, but we want to look a little bit deeper. We want to see, where are there wasted votes where it's like, okay, that's more than you needed to win. And where do we see people that are consistently voting against the party that is winning that respective seat? Are things changing in one way or another? When we look at the maps that are going to come up on the next several slides, we have eliminated precincts with fewer than 50 votes for the state legislature, which you might be surprised is actually a fair number of them. We did this to partly reduce the noise, but then also because there's even some where if you only have 10 votes and it's 5 each way, it's a tie. Or, with the noise, if you have 10 votes and it's 8-2, yeah, that shows 80%, 20%, but really it's just 6 people voting one way instead of another. So the precincts that we have in Minnesota, as is actually, I think, going to be covered a little bit later in another presentation, are actually fairly stable in terms of their shape, their size, even after redistricting. And when we look at the precincts, we're going to be reducing the likelihood of a lot of big change, people swelling into precincts or moving out of it. The precincts themselves are fairly stable. Maybe not the overall districts or shapes of them, but the precincts actually are. And the state house districts also give us the opportunity to look at this on a pretty regular, frequent basis every 2 years, instead of every 4, every 6, or a broader scale. So we can really see state and local political factors, not just national. So we have for our first pair of maps here, on the left, we see 2008, showing the precincts that are, as I like to think of it, kind of out of line with the district vote. Where you see kind of a red or a pink surrounded by blue, well, that's where the precinct voted Republican, but the district overall went to the DFL. Conversely, where you see a blue precinct surrounded by pink or red, well, that's where you had a precinct voting DFL, but overall the district went to the Republican. These are, again, kind of the ones that voted against the rest of their district. On the right, you see kind of the opposite of that, where we're seeing not just the idea of who won, who lost, but how much more or less partisan a given precinct is relative to the overall winner in that given district. And what you can see there is, hopefully not too surprising, that most do fall within that plus or minus 10%, whether that's DFL or Republican. You do have some cases where it's an overwhelmingly partisan district, but some precincts not nearly as partisan. Or conversely, not exactly the most partisan of districts, but a couple of the precincts really are. And that's something that you do sometimes also want to pay attention to. We jump from 2008 to 2010, you can see a change. And this is part of the wave election that we've all lived through not quite 10 years ago. And you do see a big shift, especially in greater Minnesota, where we saw a lot of districts that had previously, and sometimes for generations, been held by the DFL, seemingly suddenly swapping over to support the Republican candidates. You can see a little bit of this around the Twin Cities, where if we go to the previous slide and then jump back to this one very quickly, you can actually see kind of the contraction that's happening there, especially comparing the right-hand maps to each other. But that being said, it's not entirely, oh, look how much more partisan it is, or even how much more Republican. Instead, it's actually getting a more balanced dispersal of the wasted or excess votes than we had before, as well as, again, the contrasting or out of step with the district itself sort of votes. If we look then at our next pair here, 2008 versus 2012, this is going to be a particularly interesting pair. These are both presidential elections, as we all know, where President Obama won statewide, about 11% in 2008, and slightly narrower, 8% in 2012. But there is a big difference here, which if you look closely, you can tell it's the actual shape of the districts. And this is because with the 2010 wave election, that put Republicans in charge of the actual redistricting, not just US House seats, but at the state level as well. And again, there is going to be a bit of a change in terms of the precincts that are kind of not voting with their districts. But what's really intriguing here is not just that you've got rural districts that kind of stayed Republican, whether you've got urban districts that kind of gravitated towards the Democrats. But what's intriguing is that when you compare the two, you actually have a case where it does become more of a parody. Parody in terms of being even, not parody in terms of haha funny. Because in 2008, there were, excuse me, about 436 Republican precincts in DFL districts, and only about 288 DFL precincts in Republican districts. When I say there's more of a parity, that's because in 2012, it was almost dead even. 410 to 420 precincts for each party that seemed to be in the wrong districts. If we jump forward to the next slide, this is one taken a bit more recently now, 2016 and 2018, where in 2016, we had not the same as 2010, but there seemingly was something of a wave, maybe sort of, that we had the Trump campaign that came close but did not win Minnesota. But then you go to 2018 and seemingly going back in the other direction in terms of having very strong campaigns by DFL candidates for governor, both senators, both Smith and Klobuchar here in Minnesota. And despite that seeming flip side, went one way one year and then 2 years later went the other way, what's intriguing is if you look at the precincts that are out of step with their districts, it doesn't appear geographically that there's that much change. If anything, it gets to be a little bit more red where it was already pink and a little bit darker blue where it was already blue, but not really seemingly that much. If we go to the next slide, though, you'll see that that is true, but leaves a little bit yet to discuss. Because in this map, still 16 versus 18, what you can see is that, excuse me, while you do have the polarized precincts kind of similar, what you actually have in 2018 is not a full reversion to what you had pre-16, but you do see at least a tempering and a scaling back, that there's quite a few districts that were darker red or even darker blue that by 2018 have actually tempered back to be closer to the middle or closer to a median. Whether you're looking at southwestern Minnesota or up in the Arrowhead region. So that supposed Trump effect wasn't washed away, but it didn't stick around either. We'll have to see what happens in 2020 to see if there's more reversion to the pre-16 norm or if some of these patterns are here to stay.
Excellent, thanks, Stephen. So I'm going to take over talking a little bit about the farmer labor era in Minnesota as a historical example of using maps in voting. Just sort of a little bit of context, the Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota grew out of frustration with the existing party system, and it's basically the official party version of an outgrowth of what was called the Nonpartisan League. And it came out of North Dakota. There was some of this in Minnesota as well, but the Nonpartisan League, wasn't a party itself. The Farmer Labor Party became that. And it's really important because they not only won elections between the late 1910s and the early 1940s, they won governor seats, House seats, Senate seats at the national level, as well as House and Senate seats within the Minnesota legislature, although technically they were nonpartisan at that time. Everybody knew what party you were part of. And really they replaced the Democratic Party in many areas of Minnesota or overall and during some of that period. It became one of the dominant two parties. Eventually, they kind of fell out of favor. There's concerns about infiltration of communists, disintegration of progressive support, so fraction between the farmer and labor aspects of the party, and a lack of influential leaders. So many of the charismatic leaders kind of either literally passed away or moved back to the two-party system. This led them to merge with the Democratic Party in the 1940s to form what is the modern DFL in Minnesota. So I'm using data here. I'm using the results from the gubernatorial elections. This is based on county data because that's what's available from the time period. And I'm looking at 10-year time series. So I'm taking the average of each party's candidate in each election. And in all of the elections, except for one, all three parties fielded a gubernatorial candidate. So there is one election where there's only two partisan candidates, farmer, labor, and Republican, but all the rest of them have all three. So it's during that 10-year span, and then I divide it by the average support that party's candidate got statewide, so it's a relative measure. I combined sets of three 10-year time series for an early, middle, and late series, so that kind of evens out some of the extremities by doing this. So I've got an average of elections between 1918 and 1930 for the early, 24 to 36 for the middle, and 30 to 42 for the late. And this allows me to compare support for all three parties instead of just comparing the two parties that we normally have within our system. It also provides a sense of progression over time without relying on just one election to show shifts or to show support for a particular party. So these maps, which obviously look significantly different than, say, a party map would today, what I came up with was a measure of party preference. So this is not, these are sort of relative strengths of parties. And so you see here, we kept the strong Democrat and strong Republican colors similarly to what we would see today. So if you see blue, it's strong Democrat. And again, strong relative to their share overall, the statewide. So it doesn't mean in these cases that the Democrat actually won those counties. It just means relative to what the Democratic candidate was doing statewide that they were stronger. Same thing with strong Republican. And then strong farmer labor is the ones in green. And where there is a healthy mix of three-party competition in the sense of relative to the statewide results, you'll see it in yellow. And so we have here the early period versus the late period. And you can see a number of similarities between the two. But that really what looking at the maps this way gives us is that the middle of the state continued to be where the parties really had competition with each other. Republican support really grew and solidified in the southern region, particularly the southeastern region of Minnesota, and the northwestern and parts of the Arrowhead became heavily Democratic, or I should say not Democratic, farmer labor at this point, right? With a little bit of Democratic still around, and this was predominantly because of the Catholic influence in the Democratic Party at this point in time around Stearns County. Those are the reasons that that area stayed blue. So a couple other ways we can look at this is we can compare it to other variables. So one of the variables that I've looked at in my research is, okay, so does this have anything to do with this period of time we had the Great Depression? Does it have anything to do with economics? I mean, this is the Farmer Labor Party. They should have something, they should be reflecting economics. And one of the things that we can look at is the average farm value. So if the average farm value here, as you go up, you can see it correlates with the Republican support pretty well, especially in the late period if we're looking at 1940. We can also look at the sort of shares overall for farmer labor vote, and you can see that they match up pretty well, but they tell a little bit different story than what my party preference scores do in this sense, right? Just looking at the share for a particular party doesn't tell you how the other parties are doing. It doesn't show you that competition between the three parties. And then just as a couple of really quick things at the end here. So looking at the overall party preference, so this is looking across all of the time series. And you can see there on the left-hand side, again, that north versus south. And it kind of matches up a little bit with what we saw for the governor's election in 2014 with the DFL versus Republican. Not perfectly, but you can still see reflections of the farmer labor movement and its merger with the Democratic Party, 70 years later. And you can also see how it changed, therefore, in 2018, right? This is the year that Stephen was talking about after Trump. All right, this is the election after Trump. So this is not Trump's effect, but the sort of the reflection of whatever's left of Trump's effect. And again, we'll have to see if that continues into 2020 or if we revert back more to that 2014 image, which did sort of mirror the Farmer Labor Party. Okay, so the very last thing we just want to mention really quick is why this is important.
So again, part of what we're trying to look at
Hey guys,
here.
I'm so sorry, but we're running enough over time that is there any way that you can share your slides afterward? I hate to do this, but we're running a few minutes over and we have to get into the next presentation so we don't totally move everything off. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, we can share this with everybody. Yeah, and this was just kind of recapping it, but yeah, that's fine. That's not a problem.
Okay,
All right.
thank you so much.
Yep.
It's a great presentation. I wish we had more time. So, okay, well, we're gonna move on then and have Brad Newhouser, our next presenter, join us. Brad is the GIS specialist in the Elections Division of the Office of the Minnesota Secretary of State. He has maintained precinct and district data for the Elections Division of the Minnesota Secretary of State since 2007. He doesn't get to gerrymander anything, but is happy to talk redistricting if you're interested. Thanks, Brad, so much for joining us. And you are muted still, so you may want to unmute yourself.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yep, I really appreciate the invitation to be here and talk about this. And yeah, it fits in well with some of the other presentations this morning. How the lutefisk gets made. So obviously it's a pun on how the sausage gets made, right? But there is some other reasons with this. So when people look at the lutefisk, some people might look at this and go, excellent, I would love to have some of this, but some people might just think that's kind of gross and want to run away. And when I start talking about elections and geography, sometimes I get the same reaction. I can see people's eyes kind of glaze over, or else some people, I feel like we could talk about it for an hour. Hopefully a lot of you are in the latter category and will be interested by this, but this is going to be less analysis like we just heard about and more about really how this gets made, how these precincts and the precinct data gets made. So I think it is helpful as far as if you are doing analysis to know what happens, what goes into that, but it also may give you some insight into how you can have input into things like redistricting that's coming up in the next couple of years. So what are precincts? So they're areas that are the building blocks of our political system, and together make up a lot of election districts. So you can see in the upper left, that's one precinct in the crosshatch, which you can probably see there. And then you can see how that precinct fits in with other precincts into different kinds of districts, like county commissioner districts there, congressional districts, state house districts, as we just heard about in the other presentation. What else are they though? Also, they are areas that have a set of voters that are on the polling place roster. And they're also areas where voters get a specific ballot style. So when you go to that precinct, you get a certain ballot that has certain offices and candidates on it. And usually the precinct will have just one ballot, but there are certain cases where precincts are split by school districts. And so there might be multiple ballot styles for one precinct. And then precincts are also, as we were just hearing, areas where you gather up those election results for that certain area, tally up the votes for each candidate in that precinct, and then you can add those up. Just got a couple of screenshots from our website where you can see a lot of election results over the past 20 or so years. Just to get an idea of some other info, Minnesota currently has 4,110 precincts. I spend a lot of time looking at maps like this, so it has a lot of them. One way to view that, rather than results from an administrative point of view, is how many voters are there in each precinct, and could range from 0 to, in some cases, over 5,000 voters in a precinct. Not many, because that's really pretty unworkable for a lot of administration to get that many voters to come to a polling place. Typically more than the 500, maybe 1,500 range. The darker, obviously, are more voters in this case. And as far as the area, that also can vary a lot. So these are a few precincts that don't have any voters in them. There's a couple in Minneapolis, which if you look carefully at maps, you may say, why are there no votes? Those precincts near Makaska. It's because well, one of them is in the lake, and there's another one that's just a little bit of parkland. It's just some quirks about how Minneapolis wanted to draw certain district lines where there was these chunks. And then much larger areas up in Coochin County, that West Coochin precinct has no voters in it. I think it's just pretty boggy is my understanding. So a lot of variation across things. Who makes precincts? So mostly it's the responsibility of cities and towns. If there's unorganized territory that's not part of a city, not part of a town, then the county has the responsibility. Precincts cannot include more than one municipality or more than one district. And as I mentioned, the exception is school districts. It can be non-contiguous. You can see that example in the upper part there. That's part of the New Hope and Crystal municipal boundary, which is pretty unusual, especially in the inner sort of metro area. Outstate, there's some odd annexations which cause things like that too. And they're created after the redistricting process, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can see in that lower image, that's part of the district boundary between congressional districts 1 and 7, where when that was drawn, it was actually drawn through a driveway of a farm in Cottonwood County. Don't know why, but that's how it was. So that's what we live with for 10 years. Just show a couple graphics about those different areas. So cities, over 800 cities, but they have over 2,000 precincts. So a lot of cities have more than one precinct, not all of them. You can see some of the numbers for some of the bigger cities there, how many precincts they have. And townships obviously are most of the actual geographic area of the state. Over 1,700 townships. Not many of them have more than one precinct. And then those unorganized territories are in 16 counties. They're mostly out, in the northern part of the state. And you can see like Coochin and Lake of the Woods are almost all unorganized. Cook County as well. And also Fort Snelling, closer to Minneapolis and Hennepin County is also unorganized. So that was a little bit about precincts. Why is our office involved? So the Secretary of State is the Chief Election Officer for the state of Minnesota. We help administer elections along with the county and local elections officials. A big part of what our office does for elections is maintain the statewide voter registration system. So that has all the voter registrations in the state, absentee ballots, keep track of those, the districts and precincts, address ranges, which tell what address is in what precinct. All those things are contained in that database. And then since 1997, it's been in state statute that we maintain a computer database of precinct and election district boundaries. I think I'm the 4th person who's been maintaining this. So it's, haven't been a lot of different people doing it, but our office has done that for a while. But as mentioned, we don't decide on the boundaries, we just keep track of them. But that does bring us to redistricting. Before I tell what redistricting is, first I'll just talk about that graphic on the left. That's, I'd gone back and looked at old maps of congressional districts after all the different redistrictings and just kind of tried to compile those into one thing so that as you go through the kind of the clock phase, originally Minnesota had 3 congressional districts, and then after redistricting got up to, I forget what the maximum was, 10, might have been more, and then back to our current 8, and as the boundaries change, you can see them there. But that's the process, redistricting, of adjusting boundaries of election districts after the census so that the population of each district is roughly equivalent. For congressional districts, that's actually down to the individual person, so they try and get the population that close. But for other districts, like legislative districts, there's a little bit more variance, more like 2%, I believe. And then with others, like county commissioner districts, it's more like 10%, so there's more latitude. In Minnesota, so the redistricting of the congressional and state legislative districts happens first. Theoretically, in law, it's done by the legislature. in practice in the recent decades, it's been done by the courts because the legislature, both houses need to pass a bill and it needs to be signed by the governor to actually get things redistricted, and that just has not happened in these years. So after that happens, the congressional and legislative redistricting, then precincts and city wards are done, and then county commissioner districts. As far as what our office does, we sort of maintain precincts outside of redistricting. Before redistricting, we work with the Legislative GIS Office, which is the main state liaison with the census for redistricting matters, to make sure everything's updated. Once redistricting happens, we actually end up doing a lot of, or helping local jurisdictions a lot, with counties, cities that have wards, school districts that elect by board member districts, helping them get the data they need, figure out what analysis they need to do if they have questions. And then afterwards, we need to work with the counties to make changes to the districts, precincts, and address ranges in the voter registration system to make sure that all gets updated. So, people are going to the right polling places, they're getting right names are on the right rosters, they're getting the right ballots and everything before the next elections. Then we also update the precinct data. So gathering information after 2012, and this will happen after 2022, or in 2022, gather information from the cities, towns, counties, and create a layer for the state. It's a wide variety of information we get. We might get sort of legal or meets and bounds or descriptions of what the precinct boundaries are. Get a lot of maps, sometimes paper maps, but more often paper or PDF maps. And then last round through, we started to get some more geodata, hopefully get even more. That would make life a little bit easier. And some counties, hardly anything changes, or maybe nothing. And then other counties like Hennepin and Ramsey, probably everything changes effectively. And then after that, we have kind of time to do maintenance. There are times when cities might change the number, the boundaries of their precincts, as you can see in the graphic below. It's just a screenshot from our website describing a few changes. It's more common that there are changes due to annexations and detachments. Those have to get updated because since the precincts don't cross municipal boundaries, so the precinct boundaries continue to change with those. And then rarer, but they do happen, there's incorporations, where towns or cities might incorporate, consolidations where cities, might come together into one, two cities become one, or dissolutions where cities, there's a lot of small cities in outstate Minnesota, and sometimes, they have less than a dozen people, and they decide, it's not worth being a city anymore. Let's go back to being part of the township. And then, as mentioned earlier, this is distributed on the geospatial commons. So there's kind of a current voting districts data set, and then there's a data set of election results, general election results since the last redistricting. And hopefully, well, certainly after this election this year, we'll add 2020 to that. And then I'm planning to hope to go back and get the previous decade done. It's a project I've started on, but got put off. So, and then there's also some data on our website in a couple other formats in KML format, which is helpful if you're not a GIS specialist, and then GeoJSON files if doing more stuff with the web. People tend to use that. And then you can also order maps from our office. Quick plug for that. It's only $11 for a big wall map. So I think it's a pretty good deal. And then last thing I wanted to talk about was bringing a little bit more Go2 elections. This is a project we were part of over the past couple of years with the National States Geographic Information Council, I believe it is. They have a project they've been working on called Geo-enabled elections, where they're trying to have more GIS sort of applied to the elections arena. And so we were part of this pilot project working with people at the State Geospatial Information Office. In phase one, I don't think we accomplished it, but we were working towards voter precinct auditing, which I'll describe in the next slide. And then this year, we're taking on a little bit smaller bite and just looking at trying to geocode polling places. So this voter precinct auditing process is really interesting, and other states have been working on it too, because it's there have been these cases where, it's come up, like in Virginia, there was a big case where some number of voters got the wrong ballots, and it had an impact on the outcome of that race. And so we're basically taking voter addresses from our voter registration database and including the precinct for what their precinct is coded as there, giving that to MinGeo. And they're able to geocode those to find the latitude and longitude points for those addresses. And then they're able to do a point and polygon GIS analysis and say, according to the GIS data, where is this latitude longitude point, figure out what that precinct is, and then compare those precincts from the geocoded point to what was in the voter registration database and see if they're the same. Ideally, they should be, and in the vast majority of cases, they were. There's about 0.5%, a little bit more than that, where there was some question. And so those are ones that we have started to go through and do some analysis about. And I'll give a couple quick examples. There are some cases where there's issues with the geocoding. So ideally, the geocoding would be on the top of the building, because for voting purposes, the residence is basically where you sleep, so the building. But a lot of times geocoders might be like at the end of a driveway or along an address, a street. So in this case, you can see those red squares where the geocoder, these addresses were geocoded to, but they're just across the yellow precinct line. So it looked like it was incorrect, but actually those are really in the right precinct. Sometimes there were issues in the geodata we found, like this example. This precinct boundary went along a school district line for part of the way. And so I used the data from the Department of Education after the 2012 redistricting, but then a few years later, they made a correction to it. And it wasn't something I had known about or noticed until we did this analysis, so then was able to adjust that. And then sometimes there's issues with the address range. This is an example. You can kind of see those little red dots or circles where there was some new construction of apartments that was on the same street, but across the precinct line, the orange precinct line in this case, from where the rest of the precinct is. And so that's one where I contacted the county for them to look into that and make adjustments. So that was a lot, but hopefully learned something, found some interesting things. Got a couple, we also have some different election statistics maps on our website if you want to check those out. These are about pre-registrations in counties and election day registrations, a lot of other things, a lot of other analysis you could do yourself. And final and last thing is say, be patient if you haven't gotten your absentee ballot yet. That's what I got.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brad. If anybody has any questions, hopefully they can chat them to you and in the Q&A portion. And if you're able to answer them, I'm sure we would really appreciate it. But I really enjoyed your presentation. So thank you so much. Good to know.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, we will move on and I will introduce our next presenter, who is Melinda Kernick. Melinda is the spatial data analyst and curator at the University of Minnesota Libraries and USpatial. She documents and organizes spatial data in the data repository from University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Geospatial Commons, and the Data Curation Network. She also contributes to the Big Ten Academic Alliance Geospatial Data Project. She has a master's degree from the University of Minnesota. Thanks so much, Melinda.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. As Brianna said, I am Melinda Kernick. And so I am a curator for the University of Minnesota Libraries. I'm also part of the Research Data Services team, which is a group of librarians championing good data management practices. So this morning, I'm going to talk about some data management considerations specifically for community engaged mapping projects. So this is kind of more of a precursor to the next section of this event with the presentations on spatial data. All right, so maps are deeply political. There is significant power held in choosing what details about the world we are we consider worth recording and visualizing. And community mapping projects often aim to draw attention to inequity, highlight lived experiences, or to promote community development. Sometimes they're focused around crowdsourcing observations and experiences, so openly inviting anyone who encounters the map to add to it. An example of this is this accessibility map designed by a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania that provides information about building infrastructure for folks navigating campus with a range of mobilities. Some community mapping projects instead mobilize volunteers to collect specific spatial information, such as this map of public vacant land in New York City. The group that created this map, 596 acres, pulled in data from the city and then sent staff and community members to check the locations or to ground truth it. And then they organized efforts to create community gardens in these spaces. So community mapping projects can really bring visibility to things that might otherwise be left unexamined, or to reframe what it's like to experience a place. And in that way, they are really inherently political. So today I'm going to focus on tips for projects where there's a partnership with a community organization and where members of the community are helping not just to decide what should be mapped, but also actively participating in creating data and gathering observations. So I'm going to talk specifically about 2 data management challenges for these kinds of projects, and then some possible tools and ways forward. So the first challenge has to do with keeping track of versions of data. And so this is something that's always a challenge with research, but it can be particularly complicated for community projects where you have folks collaborating across different groups with different organizational structures, different practices for keeping documents, and different types of access to technology. So if you find yourself in this situation, working on a project like this, the best thing to do is to make a plan. How and when are data going to be shared? Who will have primary responsibility for the data? And what kind of access do the other project partners need? So to think through these kinds of questions, the libraries has a data management plan template available. And this template is very detailed because it's designed for federal grants, but it is a good place to start in scoping what's going to be created and how that work is going to be shared and sustained over time. If you are transferring data files back and forth between organizations, it's a good idea to work out a file naming system with your community collaborators. That way you can quickly determine which of the files are the most recent and relevant. And so your file naming system might have some kind of abbreviation to represent the project, maybe something to describe what type of data is being included in the file. And then you might want to include either a date or a version to help keep track of changes. So we recommend using numerical dates with year, then month, then day. When you write your files that way, they will sort in the expected order, like chronologically. And then if you're using versions, use leading zeros. So again, if you have more than like 10 versions of a data set, which might happen, if you have leading zeros, it will sort as expected. And then note that the best file naming system is the one that you and your partners are going to follow consistently. So there's really no right way to do things, no one final solution that's the best. If you are collaborating through a digital platform, check the program you're using to see if there might be version control options. So for example, if you're collecting information in Google Spreadsheets, you can look at version history. And you can also set restore points by naming a current version. So you can set that and then come back to the data as it looked at a certain point in time. So it's really useful if you're sending something to be reviewed by a partner. Another option for collecting spatial information is Survey 123, an ArcGIS product that's available to faculty, staff, and students at the U of M. With Survey 123, participants can quickly record information about a location and then add it to a map. And one of the great features of this is that you can track and filter based on the date that a point was created or edited. So that's another good way to keep track of versions and changes over time. All right, so that brings us to the second challenge, which is thinking long-term. So one of the most significant challenges facing community mapping projects is their long-term sustainability. When grant funding runs out or the person who's coordinating data collection moves on to other things, what will happen to the project? In fact, one of the maps I used as an example at the beginning of this presentation, the living lot map, it's no longer being supported. And that's because it's simply very time consuming and challenging to keep these kinds of maps up to date. So again, the key is to think ahead and to make a plan. Is the data set you're working on ever going to be complete? Is there a point at which all of the places of interest will be mapped and the data don't need to be updated anymore? If that's the case, it's mostly a question of who's going to maintain those final files over time. If on the other hand, like the living lots map, the project needs to be updated and maintained, who's going to be responsible for that work, and how can you best set it up to make sure that that does keep happening over time? And so for many community engaged projects that start at the university, the goal is to ultimately transfer data, documents, and technical capacity to those community partners. And for mapping projects, this can be logistically complicated. If you're building within university licensed software like ArcGIS Online, some items can be very tricky to transfer to another organization. For example, story maps. Very hard to move. So walking through what the process is, what the transfer will look like, who you want to own the files in the end can really help you figure out how to set your project up at the beginning to minimize issues. And then whenever and wherever your data are going to be kept long-term, it's important to document details about the data and how it was collected. So that this is so that it can be reused in a responsible way and understood by those who will be in charge of maintaining it. So some things to make sure to write down include descriptions of data fields, if there's any abbreviations or codes that you used, keeping track of those. The technical steps of data collection and processing, who is involved, are there any known issues or biases that might be present? And then are there any permission restrictions on the data? So any agreements that you made with community partners or participants that might shape how it should be used. And so the libraries does also have a general template for this kind of documentation that you're welcome to use or tweak. And you can find that at z.umn.edu/readme. So to close out, if you're getting started or finishing up a mapping project and want to talk about spatial data management, here are some resources. You are very welcome to email me directly. If you're working with University of Minnesota licensed software, the USpatial Help Desk may also be able to assist you. And then for more general data management questions, you can write to the Research Data Services team, data@umn.edu. Thanks for listening, and happy to take questions if there's time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Melinda. Everybody, if you have any questions, we do have a couple of minutes still, so feel free to chat any questions you have. Yeah, we'll give it a minute or so here to see if any questions pop in before we move on to our next presentation. But I really appreciated your talk. It was great. Thank you. Okay, well, it looks like we do have one question that came in quickly. Did you say story maps like Esri are hard to transfer?
Yes, so story maps are tricky if you have two separate organizations and you are trying to transfer between the two. The thing that's challenging about it is that when you try the best tool they have right now for copying. When you copy it over, it preserves all of the links to the original story map. So basically, if you transfer it, you end up having to go through and sort of reset every web map, every data layer, every picture that you had in the original. And there are a few tools that attempt to get around this, but they're kind of expensive. So for story maps, I mean, if you're making them at the University of Minnesota, after you leave the university, you can continue to host them at the university. But if your goal is to transfer them to a partner, it might make sense to just start them in your partner organization's account, because that's one thing that is very, very hard to transfer.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions coming in. One of them said, do you have thoughts on where to go for long-term storage of data sets, community generated?
Sure. So if you are in partnership with the university, we have a data repository. Its short name is DRUM, the data repository for the University of Minnesota. So anyone who has an affiliation with the university is welcome to submit data sets. And so if you're in partnership with a community and that community is happy to have that data publicly available, that's a great place to archive. If the community wants more restrictions on it and embargoes, feel free to contact us. There are some other repositories that have some additional restrictions that might work for your community partners.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, one more question coming in. In terms of human rights issues, other than housing and education, what do you think is important to map in Minnesota?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, I think there's a wide range of topics that might be applicable to map. I think just looking at how resources are divided more generally, I mean, housing certainly, but other kinds of infrastructures and how different people use them around the city. I think those sorts of projects can be really politically relevant.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Melinda. And if people have more questions, feel free to chat them. And Melinda, if you're willing to answer back in the chat feature in the Q&A, I think that would be great. Thanks so much. This was a great presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. We will move on to our next presenter, Amelia McNamara. Amelia is an assistant professor in computer and information sciences at the University of St. Thomas. She's a PhD in statistics from UCLA, and her research focuses on data visualization and spatial statistics. Thanks so much for joining us, Amelia. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll see if I can share my screen. So the talk that I'm giving today is called Spatial Gerrymandering, Can It Be Avoided? And this is kind of a short version of a talk that I gave at IAS a year or two ago, which you can find on YouTube if you want to hear more about this. I'm Amelia McNamara. I tweet at Amelia MN, which is a double entendre because my last name is McNamara and I live in Minnesota. And I just tweeted a link to these slides if you want to follow along. And what I'm going to be talking about today is basically like how statisticians think about spatial data and then how that relates to problems of gerrymandering and spatial aggregation. So when I think about geographic data, I think about three main types of geographic data. I think about points, like individual people or trees or point locations, lines, which could be streets or rivers or something like that. And then the kind that I'm the most interested in are polygons. So that's a shape that encloses some amount of geographic region. And polygons could be regular or irregular. You could imagine tiling a bunch of hexagons across the landscape, but then the US states are a type of polygon. They enclose some amount of area. So statisticians talk about choropleth maps, which are the kind of maps that you often see after elections. It's a map where an area, a polygon, has been shaded according to some value. So this is a map which is from Seattle. It was a proposition about a light rail measure, and the blue areas are the ones that voted for the measure, and the red ones are the areas that voted against the measure. And there's already kind of this visual issue with choropleth maps, which is that large regions give a lot of visual weight. So if you looked at this map and you didn't know anything about Seattle, you'd probably say, oh, clearly that measure did not pass. But if you have some contextual knowledge about Seattle, you'll know that most people live in the city and not out in these rural areas. And so the measure actually passed, even though those blue areas look visually much smaller. So that's one of the areas about maps that I think about. And then the other one, which is maybe more directly relevant to the problem of gerrymandering, is the modifiable areal unit problem. And so Stan Oppenshaw has this, this quote, the areal units used in many geographical studies are arbitrary, modifiable, and subject to the whims and fancies of whoever is doing or did the aggregation. So there's this image that if you've thought about a modifiable areal unit problem before, I'm sure you've seen. It's got yellow circles that are point data, and then it's being aggregated into different spatial regions. So one, the polygons are squares. The next one, they're more organic shapes. And then the one on the bottom kind of looks like a Voronoi diagram to me. And depending on which way you aggregate the data, if you count up the number of yellow dots that are in those regions and then shade them according to that count, you'll see different spatial patterns. So in the top one, I see kind of a hotspot in the middle. The second one, I see an even larger hotspot with those two dark regions. And the bottom one makes it look as if the rate is the same across the whole region. So that's the problem. It's the same underlying data, but you're getting a different spatial visual distribution. And I think it shouldn't be super surprising that you can get different visual distributions based on the way that you aggregate data. This happens even in one dimension. So I have this interactive essay called Exploring Histograms that I wrote with a collaborator, Aaron Lunzer. And our goal of the essay was to show how if you have data in one dimension, you could use a dot plot to represent that data. So that's like the yellow dots in our modifiable area unit problem. But then oftentimes we have to use a histogram. So we need to count up the number of dots that are in a particular bin, and then we will make the height of the bin correspond to that count. But the shape of that visual distribution is really going to depend on the bin offset for those histogram bins. So if you keep all the bins the same width, but you move the bin offset around, you're going to see different distributions. And then if you keep the bin offset the same, but you change the bin width, you make the bins skinnier or fatter, again, you're going to change the visual distribution that you see. So we're seeing the same kind of thing happening in two dimensions in the modifiable area unit problem. And one of the common ways that we think about the modifiable areal unit problem in our sort of day-to-day life is through the problem of gerrymandering. So this is an image from Wikipedia, and it's a political cartoon, I think from 1812, and it's about the Governor Elbridge Gary, not Jerry, and sort of doing this way of making election districts that led to a particular electoral outcome. If you want to know more about gerrymandering, I really recommend this Last Week Tonight piece by John Oliver. He goes through a lot of this stuff in 20 minutes, and he's much funnier than me, so I'd highly recommend that. But one of the pieces that he calls out is this piece from the Washington Post called "This is the best explanation of gerrymandering you will ever see." And again, This is kind of like that MAUP image. We've got squares, which are people, and then we're going to divide them into districts. And depending on the shape of the polygon that we make, we're going to get different outcomes. So we could have perfect representation where the outcome perfectly matches the overall percentage of voters in the original data. We could also do compact districts that are unfair, and then we could gerrymander where we would make a district that is neither compact nor fair. So when we think about gerrymandering, it's sort of arranging those spatial polygons for a particular outcome. And usually districts need to have a few qualities. They need to be compact, so they can't be sort of like long and snake-like. They need to be contiguous, so you can't have islands that are not connected to one another, and they should respect something about the political community or a shared interest community. So those are some rules. So of course, there are electoral districts that don't respect those policies. One famous one is North Carolina's 12th district, which used to look like this. It's following a highway, and it is basically packing together a bunch of minority voters, Black voters who lived along this highway. And it was judged unconstitutional, and they had to change their voting district. So if I go back, here was the original, and then here's the new one. So that one is much more compact in the new scenario. Of course, you could have districts that are not compact, but are still fair. I'm running out of time. There's a beautiful video which would let you try to come up with some fair districts. I'd recommend checking this out. And I'm going to skip this one. This is a piece by Kevin Hayes Wilson where he redraws the states to show how that could change the overall electoral outcome at the country level. The gerrymandering problems go beyond just politics and electing people. We also see gerrymandered school districts in the Twin Cities. So this is St. Paul, and these are racially gerrymandered school districts where you can change to maybe a smoother set of districts, which are more integrated, and you can see the difference if you look at students assigned the nearest school versus the way that the school districts are zoned now. So it's not just politics, it's not just school districts. Spatial aggregation was part of the problem that happened with the Flint water crisis. And I have some research about change of support methods where me and some students tried to work on the Flint water crisis data using some statistical methods. And I've been talking about this for a long time, the Flint water crisis and the spatial aggregation as part of it. It's gotten more and more depressing to talk about because when I started the project, I said, well, what if we had these statistical tools? Maybe we could have avoided the Flint water crisis or sounded the alarm earlier. And we now know that even though the alarm has been sounded for over 5 years, the crisis is not over. So I've gotten a little bit less enthusiastic about statistical methods in some of these situations. But back to the political situation where we have gerrymandering and we might want to sort of make an argument that something is gerrymandered, that the districts were chosen for some particular reason that might be unconstitutional. There's this idea from statistics of sampling distributions. And sampling distributions are, you sort of say, what would the world look like if the null hypothesis were true? You know, if this drug really had no effect on cancer, what would some outcomes be like? If there was no correlation between these two things, how often could you see a correlation that looked different than zero? Because there's random variation. So sampling distributions often look like this dot plot here. And the question that statisticians will ask is, okay, if this is the distribution of things we could have seen under the null hypothesis, are there outcomes that are off in the tail? So I've got one dot here that's kind of off in the tail, and that would be pretty unlikely if the null hypothesis were true. So one person who I think has been doing great work related to gerrymandering and trying to fix some of the problems of partisan gerrymandering is Wendy Tam Cho. She had this paper a number of years ago toward a talismanic redistricting tool. And the idea of that paper was to get a computer to generate many sets of electoral maps. So respecting these compactness and contiguity guidelines, looking for a set of political interests, and then looking at the outcome of an election, given these thousands or hundreds of thousands of potential election maps. And then you could see, is the actual election outcome that we saw, is that on the tails of the distribution, or could it have happened just by chance if there wasn't any partisan gerrymandering? So she's got basically a sampling distribution that I've reproduced here from her paper. And she's done a few more recent papers like this one about technology-enabled coin flips. And I think that these arguments are a way to combat gerrymandering. So I've been really excited about them as well. But if you follow the news about gerrymandering, you probably know that that approach is unlikely to work because of this Supreme Court decision, which said that partisan gerrymandering is actually not something that the courts can even make a statement about. So even though I think that Wendy's work would be a great way to make an argument that something is gerrymandered and maybe even produce an ungerrymandered map, that's maybe not something that we can actually do based on this Supreme Court decision. So I think my main conclusion is there are statistical approaches that we could take in order to fix gerrymandering or make it more apparent, prove that it exists. But there's more to life than statistics, and gerrymandering, whether it's political or it has to do with school districts or the Flint water crisis, it's more than just data. Data is political, and so we have to make the change at the political level. So thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amelia. We have a couple minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to please chat those. And we can spend a couple minutes for questions before we head off to the break. So feel free to chat those in. Okay, we've got someone asking, would ranked choice voting be a useful supplement to more representational voting?
Yeah, so I think one of the questions that I often get when I give a talk like this is about the Electoral College and why do we have it, and couldn't we just do voting based on popular vote? And as a statistician, that's not something that I can really answer. I think that that is one of the solutions for statistics is like don't aggregate your data. If you have point data, why would you aggregate it up to the polygon level if you don't have to? And that's basically what we're doing with the Electoral College. I don't really know how ranked choice voting would relate to these polygon issues, because some of the gerrymandering stuff, so there's like strategies for gerrymandering, there's packing and cracking. Packing is you try and put similar voters together into one district so they can only win that one. And cracking is splitting them so that they don't have any power in any individual area. And part of the issue with this is just that people in the United States especially, but I think everywhere, tend to pack themselves. So Democrats pack into cities. So again, like if the ranked choice is within the district, I'm not sure that would make a huge difference.
Okay. Another question is, you've pointed out a bunch of amazing resources. What is the best way to access them?
So the links are in the slides. I tweeted a link to the slides on my Twitter, which is Amelia MN. My website is also linked on the main page for today's event. And if you go there, I think it's the research tab, presentations. The slides are linked there as well. I guess I could drop it into the main chat too once I'm off video.
I think we did as well. So,
Oh, perfect. Okay.
okay. One more question just came in. Historically, Minnesota has had higher turnout than other states. Is voter turnout a factor or variable in gerrymandering?
I've never thought about that before. I would assume that it is. Again, I think that if you're going to do partisan gerrymandering, you're probably trying to consider sort of like predicted turnout as you're trying to do this packing and cracking. If you think that people in this district won't turn out, maybe you can pack those people into the district, and then just a few of your preferred party along with a bunch of unlikely voters from the other party, maybe that would help get your partisan outcome.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have for questions right now. I'll say if people have more, maybe they can chat them at you, and not that you don't also want to take a break, but maybe you can answer them as you come back from the break if you've got a few minutes. Otherwise, thank you so much. This was a great presentation. I'm so glad you were able to join us. And I want to thank all of our presenters from our first set of presentations this morning. We loved having you all here, and the great questions that people asked, as well as your great presentations, gave us, I think, a lot to think about. We are going to take a quick break until 10:45, so for the next 10 minutes. And we will reconvene then for our second set of presentations, which are our data presentations. I can't remember exactly what they're called. Anyway, thank you so much, and we'll be on a break, and we'll restart in a few minutes. Thanks so much.
Welcome everyone to the second half of the 2020 Thinking Spatially Symposium, Mapping Politics and Polarization. My name is Kate Carlson, and I'm a spatial technology consultant at USpatial, a center on campus that supports spatially related research and teaching. I will be moderating the next 45 minutes of presentations, introducing you to 4 people from the university who are geospatial content experts in their area. They'll be sharing information about a variety of spatial resources and tools that are available here at the university. There'll be a few minutes for questions after each presenter, like you saw in the first half of our program today. Please use the webinar Q&A to add your questions to the queue at any time during the presentations. If we're unable to answer all questions, these 4 spatial data experts have graciously agreed to meet with you after the webinar via Zoom meetings from 11:30 to noon. The access to those Zoom meeting links will be provided in the Q&A. So be on the lookout for the link to a document on where to access those Zoom meeting rooms. Our first presenter is Jeff Matson. Welcome, Jeff. He works for KIRA, which stands for the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs. Jeff is a community GIS program coordinator there, and his talk title today is Equitable Economic Development on the Road to Recovery, a case study with Esri's community analyst. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Let me start my screen share here. Okay, is the presentation up? So good morning, everybody. I'm happy to kick off the second half of our Thinking Spatially forum. I hope you all enjoyed the morning presentations as much as I did. And I'm glad that Kate read the title of my presentation, because that would have taken up about half of my time if I had to go through that again. So I'm just going to jump right in and quickly talk about a few different things this morning relating to Community Analyst, which is a web-based plugin, so to speak, to ArcGIS Online. So quick overview, I'll mention a little bit about KIRA, what Community Analyst is and what it can do, and then present some of the features, the primary features of Community Analyst in the form of kind of a case study. And then if there's time, we'll have a short Q&A, and then I would invite you to join the Zoom meet and greet at 11:30 if you want more info about Community Analyst. One thing I'm not going to do during this presentation is I'm not going to do a live demo. I'm just using static screenshots just to save time and to avoid any technology problems. But during the meet and greet, we may be able to get into that. So real quickly, CURA, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, has been around for over 50 years doing community engagement, providing resources of the university to the broader community in Minnesota. We do those through a number of different programs. The one that I'm primarily involved in is our technical assistance program, Community GIS, where we provide technical assistance to largely the nonprofit and local government communities across the state. So real quickly, Community Analyst, as I mentioned, it is a web application. There's no software needed to install. You do need an ArcGIS Online account to run Community Analyst, but as members of the university community, and someone from USpatial can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe as long as you have a U of M email address, you do have an ArcGIS Online account as part of our organization, and in turn, that would get you access to Community Analyst. So what Community Analyst really does is it has a number of built-in data sets, analysis and reporting features that allow you to really quickly create profiles, create different types of business-based and socioeconomic-based analyses of any kind of geography that you're interested in. And again, as we go through this really quick case study here, I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights, some of the things that we can do with Community Analyst to get a broader sense of what our communities look like, what their needs might be, what opportunities exist, and how we might be able to use some of this data built in to Community Analyst for better decision making. So in our Lake Street case study, we are going to define a project area. We're going to create some reports and infographics, look at a few of the data features, and then end by talking about some of the more advanced analytic capabilities of Community Analyst. So the first thing that you do when you bring up your Community Analyst screen and start a new project is you have the choice of either working with defined geographies, or you can create your own custom area. And in this case, I've created a polygon of the Lake Street corridor, which runs east to west through South Minneapolis, kind of from one edge of the city to the other. And so I've defined a project area, and then with just the click of a single button, I can create an infographic based on that project area. So again, these can be based on existing geographies, zip codes, census tracts, cities, counties, or a self-defined geography, or even a geography that you've uploaded into Community Analyst. So this is just one of a number of different infographics that you can create. This is the demographic profile. And then what's interesting is within each of these pieces of the infographic, you can click for more detail. If you see down the gray area in the households section of this, you can actually click on that infographic to get more detailed breakdowns of what the households look like in your study area, or you can just save the infographic as is. The other thing that you can do quite easily is run dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of reports. A lot of them, again, based on demographics, based on socioeconomic characteristics. But then there's also a lot of economic development and business type data. So this is an example of a market profile report. It will take your study area and talk about consumer spending, whether the residents of this area spend more or less than regional averages in different categories, which might again help you target what kind of services and businesses are needed in your neighborhood, or maybe ones that have a good enough foothold where you can use that to promote the area that you're looking at. In addition to the reports, they have these kind of stereotypical kind of generic profiles of what the residents of these areas are like. These are just kind of fun to look at. but they try to give you, again, just another way to look at a general sense. So in this area that I've selected, one of the top segments of the population is something that they call Metro Fusion or Midtown Singles. And they provide some statistics, again, just to provide a very general sense of what this neighborhood and its socioeconomic traits might look like. Moving on, one of the other benefits of working through community analysts is you have all of the data that's available in the Esri ArcGIS Online catalog, including dozens and dozens of demographic variables that you can bring into your map. In this case, I was able to very quickly pull together a census tract layer of percent of the population that identifies as Hispanic or Latino. And again, seeing how that overlaps with our study area to get a better sense of kind of who's in our community and what their needs might be. We can take that a step further and run various reports on suitability analysis. So again, given a set of criteria, what are the most important areas of need within the community? And then finally, this screenshot shows an example of their smart mapping, where you can take a couple of variables, up to 5 as a matter of fact, and it will put together a map showing where these things coincide. And in this case, I'm showing all census tracts in the metro area that have a Latino population greater than 10%, and where more than half of the households are renter-occupied households. And it will quickly identify these areas and show again how they coincide with my study area. So I know that was quick, but I am out of time, and thank you for attending, and hope to see those of you who are more interested at the meet and greet coming up at 11:30.
Great presentation, Jeff. Thank you for that. Any questions about community analyst for Jeff before we move on to the next presenter? We have a couple minutes if you want to put something up in the Q&A. Otherwise, like Jeff mentioned, he will be on a Zoom meeting if you have any other specific questions about the Esri tool, community analyst. As far as new users to it, Jeff, I don't have a lot of experience with that tool. Is it fairly easy to start using as someone who may not have a lot of experience with GIS or analysis?
It is, absolutely. That was one of the things that I was failed to mention at the start, is that it is has all the tools of the kind of desktop and regular Esri software without knowing how to manipulate that and go find your own data. Everything is kind of built in and set up step by step for you.
Yeah, for maybe novice users, content area experts, but maybe not the map part.
Yep.
Great. Well, if anyone has questions, we can answer them in the Q&A. Otherwise, find the link in the Q&A to Jeff's Zoom room that he'll start at 11:30. All right. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so we are going to move on to our next presenter, who is Tracy Kugler. She's a research scientist at the Institute of Social Research and Data Innovation. She's with IPUMS. Tracy's talk title is IPUMS, Census and Survey Data.
All right, thanks, Kate. I will share my screen. All right, so as Kate mentioned, I work for the IPUMS Data Center, and we provide census and survey data access systems for academic research, policy planning, anything you would want to do with census and survey data. And I'm going to give you just a quick whirlwind tour of some of our products today. As you can see here, we have 9 different data projects. We actually have one other one that has fallen off this slide for today. And And I am going to focus on 5 of those projects that have the most spatial data in them, including one brand new one, which is the developers are working out the final tweaks as I speak. It will be launched live today. So exciting day for that one. So I'll start with IPUM's NHGIS, which is our National Historic Geographic Information System. And this is the one that is most relevant to the politics and polarization topic for today, and so might be the one that you're most interested in. NHGIS is our US aggregate and spatial data product. It has US census tables and GIS boundary files for all of the census geographic units going back to the very first census in 1790. And as you can see kind of on the left here, the granularity of the spatial data improves as you move forward in time. So we have state and county data for the entire time frame from 1790 up through the 2018 American Community Survey data, soon to be the 2019 American Community Survey data. And then we have census tracts, block groups, blocks. Block groups and blocks are only available for more recent years. We also have the whole gamut of census geographies, urbanized areas, metropolitan statistical areas, American Indian areas, anything else that you can think of. We have the GIS files and the tabular data. We also have a couple of unique features to NHGIS that really help you do analysis of change over time. So we have geographically standardized data, which are high quality estimates of 1990 and 2000 data values for 2010 geographic units. So if you're interested in mapping, for example, how the percent Black has changed over time in a particular spatial region, you can do that with high accuracy, despite all of the changes in tract boundaries or any other geographic boundaries. We can put the percent Black values from 1990 into 2010 geographic units to make that analysis easier. We also have time series tables, which are defined sets of tabular data, again, moving over time, and where the geographically standardized data address changes in boundaries over time, the time series tables address changes in how data were categorized over time. So in one census decade, they may have published age bins with breakouts for single years from 17 to 21. In another year, they may have done single years from 18 to 24. So we try to do a standardized time series so you can have an age profile that goes from decade to decade consistently. And we do that for a wide variety of variables. Most of the time series tables cover the 1970 to 2010 timeframe, but we do have a couple of general ones that go back to much earlier years. Moving on to IPUMS USA, which is our US microdata product. And if you aren't familiar with microdata, I know that I was not prior to starting work at IPUMS. Microdata are the individual person and household records from the census or American Community Survey in this case. So you would get, each record would be one person's response to the census and have all of their responses to every question that was asked. So these are very powerful data for doing customized tabulations, for doing individual level modeling. They're very flexible, but the drawback of microdata, especially if you're thinking spatially, geographically, is that the geography is limited. In kind of the modern era, the geography that we have on US microdata are special public use microdata areas, or PUMAs, which are areas defined by the census to have 100,000 people or more in them, and that's to protect confidentiality. So if you get the person's full record, the idea is to not be able to identify exactly who that person is. If you knew within a small geographic area, you might be able to figure out who that person is. And I should mention that these are from 1950 forward. These are all sample data. So we only have 5% sample, I think, for most censuses. For 1940 and earlier data, we actually have the full count data because those have come out of the 72-year embargo and they're now public. We do have slightly different geographies for the earlier years, including counties from 1850 to 1940. And then we have international census data as well. So IPUMS International is our international microdata product. And again, that is these individual and household records. We currently have 98 countries and over 1 billion person records. We'll be up over 100 countries later this fall. And these data require specific agreements with the statistical agencies in those countries to acquire and disseminate the microdata. So that's why we don't have every country in the world. Most of these data are from the 1960s to the present. We do have selected countries where we have historical data from the 18th and 19th century. And those are primarily kind of North Atlantic countries. So Northern Europe, Canada, and the US. And in terms of geography, most of these countries, we have second level administrative units. In the US, the second administrative level is counties, so that equivalent in whatever country you're getting data for. Again, we do have confidentiality restrictions on these data. In most cases, we are not allowed to disseminate geographic identifiers for places that have less than 20,000 people. So if a second level administrative unit would have fewer people than that, we have to combine it with neighboring units until we meet that threshold. And finally, or not finally, I have one more, but IPUMS IHGIS is our brand new launching today product, and it is our international aggregate data product. So again, like NHGIS, we have the tabular published data and the boundary files to go along with it. IPUMS IHGIS includes both population and agricultural censuses. And our focus on data collection for IHGIS has been mostly on countries that aren't present in IPUMS International so that we can fill out that map. The version that is launching today has 13 data sets and 270 tables, so it's not huge yet, but we do have over 30,000 tables that are in our processing pipeline at some point. So we have a lot of data coming down the pike that will be rolling out over the next several months and years. And these data are originally from published documents from the national statistical offices in these countries. So we pull out the tabular data and make it accessible and somewhat standardized, at least in a standardized structure to make it easier to work with. Okay, and finally, IPUMS Terra is our product that integrates population and environmental data. So it incorporates microdata from IPUMS International. It has area level data, so the geographic data where each record is a geographic unit and you have characteristics of that unit, and raster data covering land cover and land use and climate data. And we can do transformations across all three of these data types. So you can request data that originated in any of these types of data and get it out in whatever format is most useful for your analysis. So you can summarize raster data to area level data to get things like the average precipitation for a year for a county, or you can get the percent of the county that is in forest cover or something like that. And you can attach that to microdata, or you can take the area level data and distribute it over grid cells to create raster data. All of these products are accessible at ipums.org. IHGIS isn't quite there yet. It will be there after our beta release period in mid-October. But if you're interested in getting that, you can go directly to this link, which will be active this afternoon. So thanks, and I think I have maybe a minute or two for questions. Otherwise, I will have Zoom room open from 11:30 to noon.
Thank you, Tracy. So great to see what kind of data are available from IPUMs and learn a little bit more about how they're harmonized and standardized for easy use. Do you have any training opportunities, or how do you help facilitate someone who's trying to access this data?
Yeah, so we have a variety of, we have documentation on our website, including users guides, video tutorials. We've been doing a webinar series for the last couple of years, and those are all archived. And we continue to have webinars on various topics within the individual products. So there's a variety of ways of getting started.
Yeah, getting some help.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
great.
Our user support desk is fantastic. So send an email to ipums@umn.edu and we will answer any questions you have.
Great to know. Thanks so much, Tracy. If anyone has any final questions they may have for Tracy, you can post them in the Q&A, and if she has time, she can answer them. Otherwise, you can join her in her Zoom meeting at 11:30. Thank you. Our next presenter, I'm pleased to welcome Ryan Mackey. Hi there, Ryan.
Hi.
Ryan is the Map and Geospatial Information Librarian at the U of M Borchert Map Library. He today is going to talk about online mapping databases and tools that he helps to facilitate through his position at the library.
All right, thank you, Kate. Yeah, so today I'm going to jump in and get started. I think this is actually the ordering of the presentations is great. Following up on, I don't talk about anything that Jeff or Tracy talked about, but they're very similar things. They are licensed databases, so similar to community analyst with slightly different data available perhaps. And then IPUMS is great being kind of broadly and openly available. And so at least one of the databases I talk about here today builds on the data that they have. So I'm going to talk about 4 resources today. I'm going to talk about Policy Map and Simply Analytics, which are 2 very similar types of databases. Policy Map covers more kind of social science topics. Simply Analytics skews more towards business and marketing topics. Social Explorer, which is US Census data, it's actually built on the data, especially from the NHGIS, but with kind of a different interface. And then something called Data Planet Statistical Datasets. A lot of publicly available national and some international data, but kind of organized into one platform. So I'm going to start off talking about Policy Map. And the main thing with Policy Map to know is that there's a couple different types of data. So you can get data layers, which people talked about today. Those are polygons. You can get data points, which obviously are just points for each of the categories that they have. Policy Map has a lot of census data available, but then they also have some proprietary data sets that they mix in and some other things that they've developed. So once you select your variable, this is under data layers, then you get this map. I'm not doing a live demo for time and technology reasons, but you can edit how this map shows up. You can edit the colors and the ranges for the data. You can change how things are shaded. So in this case, it is census tracked, and it's using median household income dollars, and this is coming from the American Community Survey. On the upper left, where it says data layer, you can click on the source there, and it'll actually get you to the actual data set that it's using. You can also add points. So they have a section called Quality of Life that has a lot of information there. In this case, libraries. So you add that, and it adds all the orange shapes there for libraries. It does have a bunch of data it's available within that data set. And so you can actually filter the points based on the attribute data if you want to. So that is one option. They also have something that's similar to what Jeff mentioned with community analysts. In this case, they call it 3-layer maps. It's on the upper menu bar. And you can essentially select up to 3 different data layers and edit the percentages. So in this case, I've selected the estimated percent of all people living in poverty and the estimated percent of housing units for which no vehicles are available. And if I change each of those to a minimum of 25%, then these are the areas that's left. And this is looking at the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So the purple areas are areas where both of these things are true. And then you can add other data as well. So the people who make Policy Map have a data layer called limited supermarket access areas that they created. This is from 2016, but this does show areas where they've determined there's limited supermarket access, at least at that point in time. So now you could see where things overlap and actually see, you know, where are areas where there's a higher instance of people living in poverty and no vehicles in the household, and then also limited supermarket access. So if your research question center somewhere around food access, this might be an interesting way to kind of target your studies. Policy Map also, you can export the work as an image. So there's a printer icon. You can kind of tinker a little bit with how it's being exported. It gives you a PDF or a PNG options, and then you could use this in a paper or report. There's also a download option. So there's a download arrow, and when you click on that, you get the ability to download the actual data behind it. You're getting it as CSVs usually, and it's usually in census geography. So you'd need, if you're going to actually map it again, you would need something to join it with, but you can get those census geography files to join that data. I'm going to talk a little bit about one Simply Analytics. So this one is, as I mentioned earlier, focused more on marketing and businesses. You can create an account with this one, so you could save your work and come back to it later. You can also sign in as a guest. Lots of data in the income category alone. There's 2,300 results. Again, this is mostly census data, but then also this brings in a lot of business and marketing survey data. So consumer behavior, you know, purchasing patterns, that sort of thing as well. And there's also some health data available. In this case, I'm just similar to the last one, going to look at median household income. You select that and it will map it. You can figure out how you want to map it. It maps by zip codes, usually by default. I'm not sure why. I would suggest you change that from zip codes to an actual mapping geography. So in this case, you can select something like block groups. Then you can also do interesting things with it, like there's a location masks under the View Actions button, so you can make a map that's a little bit more visually appealing if you're focusing on a certain area. And then you can also add businesses. So there's a businesses button in the upper left. You can browse by categories. You can switch between SIC or NAICS codes. These are two different industry standards of codes. I was looking for coffee shops, so I typed in coffee. There's a coffee shop option there. So now it's showing me coffee shops in Minneapolis overlaid over the median household income. They change as you zoom in, so how they're clustered depending on how many are there. And then if there's more than one, it gives you the option of looking at which ones they are. The nice thing with some of this data too is you can make a map out of it. And so similarly, you click export and it gives you some options, walks you through options to actually export a map. You can also export a shapefile from Simply Analytics. So you actually get, in this case, it would be the median household income, the polygon data by whatever geographic unit you want to use. And then there's also an option to get the businesses. So the businesses, you can click on it over on the far right-hand side of the screen, and it'll give you a listing of all of the businesses, including the latitude and longitude location, and you can export those as a CSV. Next one I'm talking about here quickly is Social Explorer. Generally, this one we use to find and access census data back to 1790 based on the NHGIS data. They just added a geodata option here, which is a place that you can go to on the left-hand side there that you can go to get these census geographies. I would say NHGIS is something I use regularly if I'm trying to actually, especially if I'm trying to do some sort of in-depth analysis and I want to do GIS with it, or add it to a GIS system. Social Explorer can be a good way to just go and grab a few census tracts worth of data, especially without having to kind of go through the whole NHGIS system. But just know that the data is kind of behind the scenes. This data is from NHGIS, but it's just a different way to get to some of it. For this one, you can click the Change Data button and decide what you want to do. In this case, you can go back to 1960, map by race. This is the total white population in the Twin Cities area. As you mouse over it, it gives you the information from that specific census tract. You can click on the button with the 3 lines and create a report. gives you various ways of selecting different geographies. In this case, I've selected 4 census tracts in South Minneapolis. And then you get this report that you can export either as an Excel or a CSV, or you can export also in statistical packages. You can adjust the dollar values for inflation, and it kind of gives you, so that's the 4 census tracts I selected plus the total for all of them. You can also export as an image and make an image out of the map that you've created. Or you can click on this button over here on the far right lower corner, and what that actually, you can create a side-by-side or a swipe map. So in this case, it's a side-by-side. On the left side is the total white population from 1960. On the right side is the white alone population from 2010. So you can either compare and or use a slider, kind of move back and forth. And the last one I want to talk about is data planet statistical data sets. So you can select kind of what data you're looking at. Most of it is mappable. And then in the upper, you can select whether it's the whole country by state or institutions within a state. In this case, this is academic library statistics, the number of digital electronic databases. If I select Minnesota, it gives me, if I select a bunch of institutions, it now gives me over time how many databases those institutions reported having. Or I can select a table ranking to show them that way. You can do a map. In this case, it just shows the locations, and the marker is shaded by the number. It's sort of a combination, odd combination of data points and choropleth mapping, but you can export these in various formats. In this case, it'd be Excel. This is public library statistics, number of librarians on staff, and so then it will show you a map, polygon map. You can export these. So this is, you can export it as a shapefile. Interesting thing you can do with this too, so the last thing I'll mention is not mapping, but just I think is interesting to know. You can select multiple data sets. So in this case, it's the crude oil price, gasoline prices, and then when we've had recessions in the US. And then if I select the area that just shows when all 3 data sets are available, you might be able to make some correlations there, or figure out some causation perhaps. But one thing that this does is you can click create DOI. DOI is a digital object identifier. What that does is it actually creates a little PDF report that you can send someone to, or you can cite if you're writing a paper or researching a question, and then someone can get back to the exact graphic that you created that also includes all of the citation information. So that's 4 databases pretty quickly, but I'm happy to take any questions now, or also at 11:30, since I might be at time.
Great, thanks Ryan for just demonstrating all of those rich data sources. There is a question in the Q&A. Actually, there's a couple, but we're out of time. But if you wouldn't mind, Ryan, just answering those for others to see, that'd be great. And then we'll move on to our final spatial data presenter. So for our last, I'd like to welcome Shauna Crossan. She's an academic technologist for the College of Liberal Arts here on the University of Minnesota campus. Her talk title is Communicating with Spatial Data in Story Maps.
Great, thanks so much, Kate. Thanks for all of you for sticking around till the very end. I'm going to jump in quick, and we're going to talk about story maps and how all of you can take all of this great data that Ryan and Tracy and Jeff showed and everybody else has talked about, and how you can communicate that out to whether it's your class, the public, whoever you're trying to communicate to. So we're going to just take a quick tour through some story maps. Come on, let's go. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, there are several platforms that do story maps. There's different tools that make story maps. So I'm going to talk today about Esri's story maps for a reason. They have been around for a while, but last year, about a year ago, they introduced a new story map builder that really is a game changer. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the ways that these story maps can be used to communicate your spatial data. So before we get there, what are the components of a story map? Well, it's a story map, so we hope that there's maps. I will tell you a little secret, don't tell. You can actually make a story map without a map, but we don't want to look at those. No, that's not true. So you need maps. You can incorporate text of a variety of different types of text. Plus, it's a very strong visual platform, so using strong, powerful visuals is really important. You can include video, audio, other types of media that you want to add into your story map. All these things come together to tell a story. Really, it's a digital platform. It's not a website, but it's a digital platform that allows you to showcase spatial data or showcase one story, and spatial data is incorporated around that. So here's just some examples so you can see. I think the best way to learn is to see some good examples. So story maps can be used to tell a story. So here's an example of a story map that's telling the history of Pride in Ireland. And you can see it's got, you scroll up and down, there's good powerful visuals here. This has some navigation, so it takes you through. There's a walking through a map with some data, some text, some images, cited images. So again, this is really just telling a timeline, a story of Pride in Ireland. You could also use a story map to illustrate inequality. This map I'm going to show now is built by someone who's worked on mapping prejudice that Kirsten talked about earlier today. She was a grad student and pulled this map together that really takes a lot of the data. Again, we're using narrative text, we're using strong, powerful images. There are maps, great maps coming in here too. There's static maps that are just images. A lot of data in here that she's using to compare and illustrate spatial relationships. And then we get into some other really powerful maps in here that she digs deep, deep into this story. So definitely you can really demonstrate how these spatial changes, like take from mapping prejudice, how these spatial relationships impact population. Another example of how a story map can be used, it can be used to make an argument. This story map is trying to make an argument about the importance of community-based services for mental health in Washington, D.C. So very different design than the other ones we saw, but again, using the same components of powerful images, text, and there's maps in here that really illustrate some of the spatial relationships and the distribution of different of who struggles with mental health and the access to services. But the whole point of this map is to argue that you shouldn't cut the lifeline to the mental health. So mental health care. So this story map is being really used to illustrate a reason why these things need to, these services need to stay in place. Another use of a story map is to showcase media and showcase stories. This one is a really powerful story map put out by the Grand Canyon Trust. It includes, again, powerful visuals. Navigate through here, mapping. I love this one. It's got voices, so there's audio in here, interviews with different members of the community talking about the importance of this space. So embedding audio in here. There's video in here as well. So really putting together a powerful visual story that is very compelling and makes a strong case. In this case, they're just illustrating the power of voices and people in this space, but also could be trying to convince people of doing something, but just really making good use of the resources and the assets that they have. Another example is about presenting data. Let's see if I can find it. This one, this is a story map that has several different types of ways of accessing data in here. So this one has a web app embedded in here, so you can actually search, the public could search in here for different types of bills, news stories, things in here. So we could, I'm not going to do this on here because it's live and you know that won't work. But this allows an easy way, a very accessible way for the public to access this information and distribute it so that people can approach it. Another kind of related thing is allowing you to gather data. This story map has a survey 123 embedded right in the story map. So if you close this off and look through it, people are expressing feelings towards race relations in the United States. Here's your opportunity to add how you feel to this map. So they've just embedded something right in here so that they can do some of that gathering of community information. Comparing data. We've seen a couple examples. Ryan showed an example, but you can also embed swipe maps right into a story map to show, show some change over time. And you can teach with story maps. At the university, we are working with a number of classes, different subject areas, different places to embed story maps, having students build story maps as a way for them to express their learning. We're in subjects such as history, Spanish, history of medicine, fisheries, and really we've seen an incredible amount of power with students building their maps and being able to communicate through story maps their learning about spatial information. So how do you access our story maps? It's at storymaps.arcgis.com. You can go in there to log in to create story maps, explore resources from Esri training resources, as well as explore their gallery and a lot of these examples that I've shown today, plus many, many others. I apologize, I don't know why I'm coughing all of a sudden. So the new story map builder was introduced in 2019. It is continually upgrading and changing. We're very pleased with the route it's going. It's really become powerful, and they're continually making improvements, and they're very open to input. It does require an Esri account. If you are associated with the university, you do have access to this. You can also create a public account with a little bit less functionality, but it's still there. One of the things I'm very excited about with the story maps, the builder is not accessible, but the story map products are accessible. They meet WCAG accessibility guidelines. Excuse me, for people accessing story maps. It does work with screen readers and other accessibility guidelines, and that's a big step forward for this Esri product, and I'm very happy to see that. I will be doing some demo at 11:30 when we're done with this, but I wanted to just show you, I'm not going to go into the details here, but there are built-in tools into these story maps that allow you to do things like create a guided tour of a space, a dash embedding maps, a sidecar. We've showed some of those before where you have a static map or an image and the text goes up and down. So all of these different options are embedded right into the story map builder. Makes it very, very easy to set them up, and allows you to really communicate some powerful content. Of course, maps are very important. There are two ways of embedding maps into your story map here. One is by taking maps that you have built in ArcGIS Online, or recent in the last couple months, you can also take data from the Living Atlas as a way to build your maps that you're going to use in your story map. There is also a new feature called the Express Map that makes, Express Maps are good for simple maps, points, lines, polygons, not complex data. But if you just want to put some points and lines, you draw these maps right here in the story map. So it's a really good tool for simple mapping, and we're very excited about the use of that. So again, that's all I was going to show about story maps, and you can explore at storymaps.arcgis.com and join us at 11:30 and we'll do a demo.
Great, thanks Shauna for introducing everyone to story maps. We don't have a lot of time for questions, but if you would like to join Shauna, she'll be able to tell you a little bit more on how you could get started with story mapping here at the university. There's some trainings and other resources that she can share with you. But this concludes our event today, aside from the Zoom meetings that will start in just a moment. So on behalf of the event sponsors, Institute for Advanced Study, Use Spatial, Dash, Lattice, and University of Minnesota Morris Libraries, we'd like to thank you for attending today. We'll be very grateful if you could take a few moments to complete the evaluation form and let us know what you thought about this event. That would be wonderful. You'll find that in the Q&A window. And also you'll find that link, if you didn't see that previously, a link to a document that has the Zoom links for the meet and greet that begins right now. So thank you and take care, everyone.